Brian Jones founded the Rolling Stones. Weeks after they threw him out, he was dead. What broke him? Fame, betrayal, or something darker? Just after midnight on a warm July night in 1969, Brian Jones was found motionless at the bottom of his swimming pool. He was 27. Less than a month earlier, he'd been removed from the band he created. And that is what makes this story so haunting. Because the mystery is not only how Brian Jones died, the deeper question is this: how does the founder of one of the greatest rock and roll bands in history become an outsider in his own creation? And when the last link is cut, what does that do to a man who's already lost control of almost everything else? Brian Jones was not simply a member of the Rolling Stones. At the beginning, he was the driving force. Born Louis Brian Hopkins Jones in Cheltenham in 1942, he grew up in a respectable middle-class home. There was music in the house. His father played piano, his mother played piano and organ. But the music Brian fell in love with was not respectable drawing room music. It was blues, American rhythm blues, Muddy Waters, Elmore James, the raw sound of another world. Brian was bright, restless, and rebellious. He could play. More than that, he could absorb instruments, guitar, harmonica, sitar, recorder, marimba. He had that rare instinct where sound itself seemed to fascinate him. But from early on, there was disorder. He pushed against the rules, he clashed with authority. His personal life was chaotic before fame ever arrived. There was protagonists, broken relationships, and scandal at an age when most people are still trying to work out who they are. So when Brian arrived in London, he was not just another young musician looking for a band. He was looking for a kingdom. And for a while, he found one. In 1962, Brian placed an advert for musicians who shared his passion for blues. Ian Stewart came in, then Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Bill Wyman arrived, partly because he had the equipment the others needed. Charlie Watts completed the early lineup, and it was Brian who gave the band its name. Looking at it in Muddy Waters' record, he came up with the Rolling Stones. At first, Brian was the leader. He chose the music, he pushed the blues sound. He got gigs. He shaped the image. He even paid himself slightly more because he saw himself as a manager. The details matter because, from the very beginning, Brian's place in the group was tied to control. He was not just playing guitar. He was the man who had built the thing. But rock bands are dangerous little kingdoms. They do not stay still. Power moves. And as the Stones became famous, the centre of gravity began to shift away from Brian. Mick Jagger became the face. The camera went to him. The girls screamed for him. He had the voice, the movements, the frontman's magnetism. Then came the real shift, songwriting. A manager, Andrew Luke Oldham, knew that the original songs meant power, money, and identity. Lennon and McCartney had shown the way, so Jagger and Richards were pushing to write. And once they did, the band changed forever. Brian's gifts were extraordinary, but they were not mainly songwriting gifts. He was an arranger, a colorist, a musical adventurer. He could turn a track into something strange and memorable. The sitar on Paint It Black, the marimba on Under My Thumb, the recorder on Ruby Tuesday, those sounds were not just decorative little extras. They were part of what made the Stones different. But psychologically, this was a terrible position for Brian. He was still useful, but he was no longer central. And that is the big difference. If you are the founder, being useful can feel like an insult. He had created the room, now someone else was standing in the spotlight. And that is where Brian's decline became more than a rock and roll drug story. Yes, The drugs and alcohol mattered. They mattered a lot. But underneath that, there was a deeper wound. Loss of status, loss of purpose, loss of belonging. Then came Anita Pallenberg. To Brian, Anita was not just another glamorous girlfriend. She seemed to restore something in him. She matched his style, his danger, his taste for drama. Together, they looked like the perfect swinging 60s couple. Beautiful, reckless, and combustible. But the relationship was volatile. There were drugs, there was jealousy, there were violent arguments. Brian could be possessive and unstable. This was not just a gentle love story. And then Morocco happened. In 1967, Brian, Anita, and Keith Richards travelled together. Brian became ill and ended up needing medical treatment. While he was weakened and vulnerable, Anita and Keith became lovers. That moment is often told as rock gossip, but psychologically, it was devastating. Brian did not just lose a girlfriend, he lost his bandmate. One of the men already taking his place musically was now taking his place emotionally as well. That kind of humiliation, its identity, not just romance. From there, Brian's position inside the Stones deteriorated badly. He became unreliable, he missed sessions. Sometimes he turned up in no fit state to contribute. Legal problems were made worse. The Stones were preparing for a major American tour, and Brian's drug conviction made entry into the United States a serious problem. By 1968, his contribution had shrunk dramatically. The band were moving towards a harder, tighter, more focused sound. Brian was drifting towards something more experimental and elusive. In public, this could be called musical differences. In private, the reality was harsher. The Rolling Stones had become a machine, and the machine could no longer carry the man who built it. In June 1969, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Charlie Watts went to Brian's home, Cotchford Farm in Sussex. Cotchford Farm had once belonged to A. Milne, the creator of Winnie the Pooh. It should have been a retreat, a place where Brian could recover and start again. Instead, it became a place where he was told the truth. He was out. The public statement was dignified. Brian said he no longer saw eye to eye with the others over records they were making. He wanted to play his kind of music. There was truth in that. But this was not the whole truth. The band needed reliability. They needed to tour. They needed to survive. Brian needed help, stability, and perhaps a completely different life. These two needs could no longer exist in the same band. The brutal thing is this: removing Brian may have been necessary, but it was still psychologically crushing. Because for Brian Jones, the Rolling Stones were not just a job. They were his achievement, his identity, his family, his proof that he mattered. Charlie Watts later reflected that they'd taken away the one thing that Brian had, being in a band. This is the centre of the story. Not simply Brian was sacked. Brian lost his last structure holding him together. And yet, the final weeks were not pure collapse. That is what makes the ending more complicated. At Cotchford Farm, Brian seemed at times relieved. He talked about forming a new group. He spoke to musicians. There were rumours of possible collaborations. He was not necessarily a man who'd given up on the future. There may have been part of him that thought, I created a great band. Perhaps I can do it again. But the house around him was not as peaceful as it looked. Renovations were going on. People were coming and going. One of them was Frank Thorogood, the builder working at Cotchford Farm and living close to the property. Thorogood had not simply appeared for one afternoon's work. He'd become part of the atmosphere around the house, and according to later accounts, there was tension, money, work and bills, boundaries. Brian was said to be becoming concerned that the building work was dragging on and costing too much. Some accounts suggested he wanted payments checked or stopped. Others suggested Thorogood believed he was owed money. So the final night did not happen in a clean, simple setting. It happened in a house full of tension. The rock star recently pushed out of the band, the builder allegedly unhappy over money, a girlfriend trying to hold things together, a nurse nearby, drink, heat, asthma, and a swimming pool. On July the 2nd, 1969, it had been a hot day. Some accounts say the heat and pollen affected Brian's asthma. That evening, Brian was at Cochford Farm with his Swedish girlfriend, Anna Wolin, Frank Thorogood, and Janet Lawson, a nurse connected to the circle around the stones. Accounts of the night do not all match. That is part of the problem. They had been drinking, and at some point Brian went swimming. Frank was also around the pool. Some accounts suggested the two men may have been alone in the water for a period of time. Others are less clear. Near midnight, Brian was found motionless in the swimming pool. He was pulled out from the water. Attempts were made to revive him, but he was gone. The official verdict was death by misadventure. The coroner concluded that Brian drowned while under the influence of alcohol and drugs. That remains the legal position. No court has ever found that Brian Jones was murdered, but the doubts never went away. Because Brian was known as a strong swimmer, because people were nearby, because eyewitness accounts differ, because Frank Thorogood later became the focus of suspicion, and because the emotional atmosphere of the house already felt wrong. The most persistent theory is not some grounded plot involving a band. It is smaller, sharper, and in some ways more disturbing. A possible argument, a bruised ego, a drunken moment in the water. According to later claims, Brian and Frank may have clashed over money. There were suggestions that Brian had teased Frank, perhaps about age, money, or status. If that happened, it is easy to see how a hot, drunken evening could turn ugly. No planned murder, no shadowy conspiracy, but a confrontation that went too far. Imagine the scene. Two men in the pool at night, one of them a fading rock star, trying to recover his pride, the other a builder who may have felt insulted, unpaid, and disrespected. There is alcohol in the body. There is tension in the air. There is laughter that stopped being funny. A shove, a dunking, a few seconds too long underwater. Then panic. That is the version of events that has haunted the whole story for decades. But it's not proven. But the absence of clear bruising or obvious signs of struggle makes certainty impossible. Then there is the inhaler. Brian has suffered from asthma since childhood. On a hot, pollen-heavy day, breathing problems would not have been a minor detail. Janet Lawson made a disturbing claim. In one account, Brian had asked her to fetch his inhaler. On her way back, she claimed she encountered Frank Thorogood, looking shaken and in a terrible state. Another version of the story went further, suggesting the inhaler may have been moved or taken. That is a chilling detail. If Brian was intoxicated, struggling in the water, unable to breathe properly, then the inhaler being out of reach becomes more than a small missing object. But again, it must be said clearly, no court proved Thorogood took Brian's inhaler. No court proved the inhaler caused Brian's death. And the official verdict remained death by misadventure. Still, the inhaler remains one of those details that makes the final night feel unsettled. Then came the darkest claim of all. Years later, Frank Thorogood, while dying of cancer, allegedly confessed to Tom Keylock. The words often reported were, "It was me that did Brian." In some versions, the implication was not a planned killing, but a moment where Thorogood snapped during an argument. It's true that would have changed the meaning of everything, but it remains hearsay. Thorogood was dead. The alleged confession was never tested out in court. Some people close to the story question whether it was said exactly as reported. So we're left with two truths. The official truth: Brian Jones drowned by misadventure. and the unsolved human truth. Something about that night has never felt entirely settled. The strongest responsible conclusion is this. Brian Jones may have died from a tragic combination of alcohol, medication, heat, asthma, and physical weakness. Or he may have died because the confrontation in the pool went too far. What cannot honestly be said is that we know. And that uncertainty is why the final image remains so powerful. Because by the time Brian entered the pool, he was already a man in pieces. He'd lost his band, he'd lost his position, and he'd lost Anita. He'd lost the role that had given him meaning. He was surrounded by people, yet increasingly alone. And whether his death was an accident, reckless rough play, or something darker that was never properly uncovered, one thing is clear. Brian Jones had become a man without a secure place in the world he created. 2 days after his death, the Rolling Stones played their free concert in Hyde Park. It had already been planned, but now it became a memorial. Mick Jagger read from Shelley. Thousands of butterflies were released into the air. And standing on stage with the band was the new guitarist, Mick Taylor. It was a tribute, but it was also a public rebirth. The band moved on, Brian became a ghost. This is the harsh truth of rock and roll. The music does not stop just because one person falls. Today, Brian Jones rests in Cheltenham Cemetery, back in the town where his restless life began. His grave still draws visitors because people sensed there was something unfinished about him. He was not only the doomed blonde rock star of the 60s, he was the founder, the architect, the boy who loved the blues so much that he built a band around him, and then watched the band grow beyond him. The tragedy of Brian Jones is not simply that he died young, it is that before he had died, he'd already been erased from the centre of his own story. He created the Rolling Stones, he named them, he shaped their early sound, and then, just as they became immortal, he was left behind. So when we look at Brian Jones, we're left with two mysteries. One is what happened in that swimming pool, and the other is perhaps even sadder. What happens to a person when the one thing that gives them identity is taken away? Because Brian Jones did not just drown in water, he'd already been drowned in rejection, humiliation, and the slow realization that the world that he created no longer had room for him. And that may be why, more than 50 years later, his story still refuses to sink. Wow, look at that. Even now, all these years later, still lots of flowers. Shows you how popular Brian Jones is. Shame the letters have faded a bit. That's great. Look, there's fresh flowers there, it's brilliant. Wow. Hello, Brian. You were the Rolling Stones. Without you, they wouldn't be there, would they? Yeah. A shame what happened to you. It really is. Okay, let's read the stone. I like the scarf as well. Okay, here we go. So it says, in affectionate remembrance of Brian Jones, born the 28th of February 1942, died on the 3rd of July 1969 at Hartfield, Sussex. Shame it's faded a bit, isn't it? And it's a good job that I'm observant, because I've just noticed behind me there's a bench. I didn't know that. Here we go, directly opposite. It's a good bench, isn't it? Must have been replaced, it can't be that old. Okay, let me get in so we can see it well. There we are. Dedicated to the memory of Brian Jones, founder member of the Rolling Stones, from the members of the Golden Stone. Wow. Wow, Brian Jones only 27. The thing is that the fame took away far more than it gave him. And in life you've got to tie yourself to the things that are more important, like your relationships and love. But do you know what? I'm so pleased that you're enjoying watching these films. The comments have been fantastic. And I enjoy doing them. We could never have watched these before, could we? But now we can. So I'll make more. So don't forget to subscribe and bing, hit the bell give me a thumbs up and a comment, because I love the comments, you know I do. So I'll see you all very soon from me, Alan. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.